Hey, hello everyone. This is Wolfe, and back for another live stream. And I've got Kevin Grossman and Gerry Crispin. Gentlemen, welcome. I really appreciate you both being here.
Thanks,
Thank
Ira.
you.
Good. Though you both have a busy schedule, been around the block a few times, a little bit. I think we're all about similar ages, but you've been in the industry a little bit longer than I have. But I've only got 25 years in it, so I'm a new kid. But I think we all came from outside. Didn't we all come from outside
I
HR
did.
space?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
So
I may not have.
No,
oh, okay.
Gary's from. He's.
I have an
time.
I have an engineering degree, but I
Yeah.
spent
Okay.
6 years
That's what I meant. Yeah, I
studying
thought you. Yeah.
studying
So I've got a
recruiting.
biology degree and healthcare background, and so we've all come from outside the traditional path. I
Yes,
would say.
I have a
So
psychology degree. So there you go.
There you go. You're
that may
in.
be more related to this than any of us. So good. Hey, so lots to talk about today. First of all, we've got the candidate experience. Certainly, big piece of this. Couple things coming out. You just had Kevin. You just represents the talent board, by the way, and just had the 2019 candidate experience report, research
hmm
report, come out. Gerry, you've been involved with that as well, and you had
Yes,
some question as part of that.
co-founder.
So a lot
One of
to
the
talk
co-founders.
about, and so I want to get into that. And then Gerry, you had a really interesting follow up to that because I guess there was a question added this year about salary, and especially
Last
talking
2 years. Yep.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay, about equality, pay equality, gender equality, how perceptions, how all that fits in. So let's just sort of jump into it. I did pull a couple. I was telling Gerry, I pulled a couple slides or a couple of the graphs. So when we get to it, if it's appropriate, I'll pull those up for you.
Sure.
But I'd like to get your perception on what you thought stood out on the 2019 report that sort of surprised you. What was, good or bad? And I will tell you what mine was, and it didn't take me too long to get into it. Was that candidate resentment last year went up 40%?
Yeah, in North
Um,
America. Yeah.
yeah, that to me just stuck out because I've been on the circuit for 2 years since my book, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization, came out. And, must have spoken to 25, 30 different SHRM groups, plus all the webinars and podcasts and everything else you do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interest. I mean, there's a lot of good people out there. A lot of us are talking and preaching about it. And yet, 2019 goes up, resentment goes up 40%,
Well,
which is
let me.
pretty serious. So I'd like a definition of resentment too,
Well, let me.
what
Yeah.
that
Let me
means.
be more. Let me give you some more context about
Good.
that, based on how we look at it. So we call the resentment rate based on the fact that there's one of the key questions in four of the key data points that we're asking, the ratings that we're asking the candidates is going forward, what kind of a relationship do you want with us, the employer, based on your overall experience? And it's a 4-point scale that goes from I had a horrible experience, I'm paraphrasing, but not a great experience. Overall, I want to sever the relationship. I'm done.
Right.
So that's what we call the resentment rate versus I had a great experience overall. I want to increase the relationship, whatever that means to the candidate. And most of the time, we're obviously talking about job-related exchanges, except for consumer-based companies that where there's definitely a potential of impacting purchasing behavior and influencing purchasing behavior. So when we say that it increased 40%, we're talking about since 2016. When we look at the percentage of candidates who say they're done versus from 2016 to now has increased that much. In EMEA, it's increased 25% since 2016. And in APAC, it's the lowest, but it's 10% increase overall. We've only just started to measure in Latin America this year, so we don't have that. There's no increase yet, although Latin America was still pretty low overall with their what we call the resentment rate. But that's a little bit more context around what we're talking about.
Right.
Now, that said, real quick, Ira and Gerry, the positive, the willingness to increase the relationship has also been trending up. That's good news, just not as dramatically.
Yeah. And it's really been there a long time. It's just that the measurement of it, we're in a position to be able to see how it's changed year over year.
Right.
But the logic has been there for a long time that if you tick off your candidates or create an inauthentic approach to how you hire candidates to bring them into a lousy company, you've got essentially the potential to increase the friction of recruiting to a point where you really can't hire any longer. And now the question is, how do we measure that? And one of the things that Kevin just talked about was the impact that it has on bottom line on the performance of the company. I'm no longer willing to even buy your products if you've got any products. But we've also asked questions related to whether or not you would refer anyone from the point where we would anchor with a statement that says, I would go out of my way to dissuade others from applying to this company, as well as whether or not I would ever come back and apply again. And if you think about it, all of those factors impact the ability of a company to recruit versus the opposite side of that, where you create raving fans by your process and have people you did not hire go out there and look for people that they can recommend they should apply to your company. And that is happening in some corporations out there now. So we're seeing companies with net promoter scores in the 50s and 60s that really represent an extraordinary value for a corporation if they can do that.
Exactly. It's add on to that I kind of say it tongue in cheek, but seriously as well. And recruiting we're in the business of no, unfortunately, right? Because we're saying no to so many individuals that are wanting to work at any employer at any given time. And you may not want everybody applying again. Of course you don't, but you do want those folks that you deem future fit, silver medalists, bronze medalists, those who may have potentially another role in the organization. So their experience, the 9 out of 10 people on any given day, can have a bigger adverse or positive potential impact on the business and the brand over time.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure, and as I'm looking away, I'm not ignoring you guys. I'm not checking my phone and texting and seeing who liked me on Facebook. I'm actually, because the comments don't come through the platform that I'm using, I need to check my LinkedIn profile and just to see if there's any questions. So for anybody who is out there who is listening, and this will be rebroadcast as well, for anybody who has any questions, just put them in the comment section. I'll try to keep an eye on that as these two gentlemen are giving their insights. So I think what you had just said is pretty powerful, because if 99 out of 100 people who apply get rejected, that's pretty significant. And some companies are asking the person they hired what the experience was like.
Correct.
But they're not asking the people who didn't apply, which is 99% of everybody who's out there. So when we talk about that negative effect, that's not easily tracked, because if 90, again, what I don't recall what percentage it was, but if even 50% of that 99%, that's a lot of people talking negatively about your company.
When we talk about candidate experience, we are really talking about all the people you touch.
Correct.
And many companies refuse to spend the effort, and it could be very little effort, but it's important effort to engage those folks who never go any further than even applying. And if we discover that they had an extraordinary penchant for wanting to work for you, that they cared about it, that they researched, that they invested time, energy, and effort to apply, and they never heard a damn thing beyond, you create the potential. And we've always known this as a possibility, but now we're measuring the reality of that and the cost of it. And so now we've got data that allows for us to kind of arm the HR and TA folks who want to go to their CFO and others and say, we need to invest more in the total experience we give everyone, not just rely on fundamentally putting a body in a seat and ticking off the 99 others who didn't get there, and then hope that they're all going to come back and line up next time.
So I know Virgin America or Virgin Media did this a few
Yep.
years ago, that they had a great study and what the impact of that bad candidate experience was. Are there any, and I'm still scouring your report and everything, but are there any other current um, studies that have come out that put a dollar amount on what the impact on that bad candidate, on ignoring the not hired candidates?
Well, not exactly, but we do have other stories on the positive side of companies that are generating revenue
Oh, all right.
from their those that they're dispositioning rejected candidates. I mean, here's the thing: we have the conversations all the time with these organizations. Many are publicly traded, mid-sized to global enterprises, right? It's not information that they want to share necessarily, especially on the negative side of what that potential impact to their revenue is, especially if they're publicly traded. But they are quantifying it. They are looking at it. We have the conversations with them. But to give you an example of somebody who turned it around into a revenue stream. So Kimberly-Clark has been a past multi-year Candy Award-winning company. They started giving coupons to rejected candidates for a variety of different roles, thanking them for their time and saying, we hope that you take this coupon and we hope that you make some purchases. Again, I'm not the exact language that was used, but they ended up converting upwards of almost 5% of rejected candidates into customers that translated into hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. That's a positive story.
We
right?
need more case studies like the Virgin, like Kimberly-Clark and others. They are there.
Yeah.
Most of them are anecdotal. Most of them are shared at our symposium annually,
and at our workshops,
and in workshops. But very often they're not published in a way that's going to fully engage others, because they don't want it out there. It's
right.
to the cost and etc.
But we do have, so Ira and Gerry knows this as well. We do have a tool on our website. It's a candidate resentment calculator that it's just easy peasy, plug in some numbers, hiring numbers, value of a customer to get some projections on what that potential cost could be. Again, pretending that you're a consumer-based organization, although we have B2B companies do the same exercise. So they understand of getting in that mindset. So there is that work, but I would agree. We've been in every year, we encourage more companies to talk about that quantification, and it's we get some really good anecdotal information, but nothing that they're willing to publish. Maybe that'll change in this year in our 10-year anniversary, but they are doing it. I want to be really clear with everybody that, and Gerry knows this too. He works with many of the same organizations on a data. They are quantifying what this cost potentially is. They are doing it.
There's no question there's a strong trend now with the kind of data that we're supplying and what they've learned about what they can do, whether they're using us or not, to really be data driven.
Right.
And that's really what the trend is forcing. And so now we can operationally define candidate experience from that perspective.
So Kevin, you mentioned this before, and you said, what were some things that people were doing, and it was giving a coupon, and that's been around for a year, or acknowledging it. But I work with a lot of small, medium-sized companies, and this is also, obviously it's across the large enterprise companies as well. But I work with a lot of small, privately owned businesses. Some have 25 employees, some have 300 employees, 500 employees. As simple as thanking somebody that they submitted an application.
Yes.
Forget that it's like I can hear somebody saying, well, we're a small company. We have 500 people apply. We can't give them a coupon. It's like, you don't have to.
No.
The bar is set so low in some organizations that just replying to someone with a more than thank you for submitting your application is just, and the way you phrased it, and this is, again, when I'm speaking to mostly SHRM HR groups, there may not even be a full-time talent acquisition person or recruiter.
Right.
Is saying, listen, instead of saying thank you for your application, the response should be, hey, we really appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your time to apply for us. Thank you for your interest. Either one way or the other, we will be back in touch with you in a week or 2 weeks or a month. or provide a contact information, or to be able to do that by video, creating a short video, some type of a better response. That doesn't cost it doesn't cost anybody a dime, and yet companies still don't do it.
And Ira, Kevin has workshops across the country,
Mm-hmm.
and he, on a regular basis, Rob, Ron, and a couple others who are fully active in this area, know that it's really the simple issues just like that. But the data is showing there's 4 or 5 key dimensions that impact how a candidate is perceiving the experience that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the practices that you're talking about, et cetera, can fit into a framework of just 4 or 5 different dimensions. Things like, obviously, being able to close it out. At some point, you need to tell somebody, we're going to move on without you.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the way in which you do that can add some value, but just doing it is an important baseline, if you will. We know that we can set expectations, right, around almost any part of the journey. We could be saying it shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes to complete an application if you decide to apply. And if you do apply, here's what you can expect. Someone will eventually tell you we're moving forward or not. So there's a whole set of expectations around that, around interviewing, or if they get that far, et cetera, that we can deal with. And one of them, probably the most important, is a perception that the process that you've developed as a employer is fair. You're not setting it up so that I definitely will be, excluded. And to do that, you need to be able to be transparent about your process. And so the companies that are learning these kinds of things are putting weight in those 3 or 4 different dimensions, developing unique practices around that. And that's what we want them to share so that they inspire others to think along those same lines.
So connect one dot to what Gerry said. So Ira, when you were saying that, the message can be very simple, concise, and straightforward. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We'll be in touch in the next week or 2 or whatever that is. If you're going to do that, then you're setting an expectation that you're going to be in touch.
You're going to do it, right?
And if you're not in touch, that's another where we see ratings go south at the end of the day, right? So another way to look at it is that when we ask the candidates every year their willingness to share their positive and negative experiences with their inner circle, people they trust, friends, colleagues they talk to every day, globally 70 to 80% consistently every year, with being a lot of the times a different pool of candidates, right? Every year 70 to 80% are willing to share their positive experiences with their inner circle. 50 to 60-ish% globally on the average are going to say they're going to share their negative experiences. That's a lot of individuals. We're talking, over hundreds of thousands of survey responses that we get. It changes, although it's still significant when we ask them, are they going to share their positive and negative experiences online publicly, right? So Glassdoor reviews, Indeed reviews, posts across social media. It's more about 50-ish% that are going to share positive, and about a third that are willing to share negative. But that's still quite significant, right? Another 30 to 40% of the candidates say every year, I don't share this information publicly because it's private, because most of us don't shout from the rooftops when we don't get the job, right? But there are still a significant group of people who will, though.
Right. And I believe that will grow. I mean, the hypothesis is that as we become more social in our willingness to be more transparent about our lives to others online, we will also be much more open about the pain as well as the joy, if you will, of engaging in our career. And the impact of that is going to have a direct effect, I think, in a multiplier effect. And we're in a position at Talent Board with what Kevin is doing to be able to measure how that changes over time, by not only by over the years, but also by region. And different regions are growing open at a different pace. So it's kind of fascinating to me to see this data.
Yep.
And one of the things that I thought was pretty profound that comes out is also that self-awareness or an organizational awareness of the perception. So I'm going to throw this up if I can find it here. There. So I pulled this from the report. So here's the perception gap. And the most significant was what we were just talking about was the people who were not selected, from that. But there were some other gaps. So do you want to kind of, both of you, I'd like to hear what you think's going on here, where you've seen some trends or improvement on the perception. But there's obviously a much lower gap from the candidate side, or a much more lower sentiment from the candidate side than there is from the organizational standpoint.
Well, just Gerry can comment too, but just briefly, there is always a negative skew, right? Again, we talk about the volume of people that are being rejected at the end of the day, or as we also define it, did not know of an offer at the time they completed a survey. That does always include a large group of individuals who weren't necessarily outright rejected, or they don't remember the autoresponder, or they never heard back, right? Which can also skew negative. There's always that overall perception. It's always the biggest gap at the point of being rejected. That's the not selected one that you see on the screen now. Always the biggest gap. But what's fascinating is that we do the front end of the process, so pre-application through screening and interview, there are those gaps. There's even a greater gap between the candy winning companies and all employers overall. And that's where we see the biggest difference in where's that investment in consistent communication, expectation setting in the front end of the process at the end of the day. And what's interesting that every year we dig a little bit deeper, when we get to offer an onboarder in the right side of that scale, the data usually collapses more. There is a gap here now on the new hire side. We are finding this year more companies felt like they were struggling with the onboarding. At least the way that we defined it in the questions that we asked.
Do you think that's because there's a greater awareness that that's part of the hiring process? Because at one point it was almost a handoff, from like the recruitment.
Some companies it still is. But I think there is a greater awareness because we're also asking what happens, how would you rate that overall experience, and what happens prior to start date, not post start date. Prior to start date. So I get an offer, I accept it, and then we ask questions about what that experience was like, what happens before. And I think a lot of companies are becoming more aware that really does set the tone of what my employee experience potentially or will be like at the end of the day.
And you and I, go ahead, Gerry.
Yeah, when I think about gaps, particularly perception gaps, I think it's really an intensity issue for me. In terms of what I'm seeing in the data and what I'm seeing in terms of how we've traditionally recruited. And let me give you an example. If I were interviewing, and I sat down in front of you and you had an opening for, I don't know, someone with a middle level of experience, and the first question you asked me was, "Oh, tell me, how old are you?" It doesn't matter what transpires after that. If I am not selected, what do you think my conclusion is going to be? It's going to be, you perceive me to be too old for that job, and that's it.
Yep, exactly.
So yeah, we train recruiters, for example, to do a number of things. We supposedly train hiring managers to do a number of things as well, but no one ever watches them. So the fact that we're not auditing hiring managers in the process is a huge gap in our development of how we should be operating today from a selection point of view. And this is becoming extremely nuanced because if we look at those individuals who perceive the hiring process to be unfair, we have the absolute strongest correlations between that perception and their overall perception of their experience and their willingness to change attitudes and behaviors to either help or hurt the company. So this perception of fairness now becomes a critical issue, and we need to be a little bit more nuanced. And that would get me into one of my favorite things lately is for the last 2 years, we've asked a really interesting question. Question number 35 is essentially something like, don't put up this slide yet, but something like, how was the salary question handled?
Right.
For the 23,000 people who got as far as an interview, right? And I find this fascinating because we now have a little bit of a history about our understanding of how we ask that salary question. If I just sit down for the interview and before we start anything, you said, so how much do you make right now? And the impact of that downstream, when I'm not selected, as 99% are not selected, would lend me to believe that something about my salary might have had an impact on that. Sure. We also know that on average, women are paid less than men. So from a gender equality, from a racial equality, from an age equality, from a whole bunch of equalities, we have to be careful about how we ask questions. Mm-hmm. So that has come up over the last couple of years. Several states, actually a dozen states now, have laws about you can't do that.
Right.
And for the last 2 years, we kind of asked, okay, so how are people doing that? And one of the answers to that is that many employers have now gotten a workaround. So the workaround is, what are your salary expectations? And so now we can see a distribution, if you will. So if you could put up that first slide, the one that shows a distribution of...
Is that it?
Yeah, here's how candidates are saying that this was handled. So now a third are saying people ask about salary expectations. Cool. And that shows that the workaround is getting a lot of traction.
Mm-hmm.
Another 30% subject never came up. Another part of the training might be, let's not deal with salary at all. And if they don't bring it up, you don't bring it up, that kind of thing. So that fits that frame. I was told the salary of the position without requesting it, 28%, pretty cool. I was told the salary of the position after requesting it, 9%. I was not told the salary of the position after requesting, just 4%. But you could predict, right, that those people would be probably more likely to really be pissed off. And I was asked my current most recent salary, 13%. If they've been reading any of the articles out there about the problem of asking that question, they're likely to be a little bit more ticked off too. So what Kevin, actually Ron, who works for Kevin, did was to go to the overall response questions about experience and now and filter for each of the answers to see how happy in general are the people who were asked salary expectations versus those the subject never came up, etc. Could you rank order from a candidate experience which would be the best and which would be the worst? Mm-hmm. I would predict that I was not told the salary of the position after requesting it would tell me a lot about the fairness of that whole system. Because they just know what I make, and they're making a decision about whether I'm going to fit based on salary. Right. So that would be the worst. And maybe the best might be, I was told the salary of the position without even requesting it might be probably higher up there, something like that. Mm-hmm. So did you include the other slide?
I think that one.
I think you did, yeah.
Yep.
So these are, in fact, overall NPS scores
Mhm.
based upon filtering each of these questions. And you can see it's an extreme difference
Yeah.
in a number of cases. I mean, these are highly significant differences in terms of how you handle that salary question and how it leads to, maybe not causes, but probably is reflective of other practices that that basically reflect the same kind of problem
That's the
in
deal.
how you're engaging your candidates.
Mhm.
And really really suggests there should be a full audit for those companies that are getting these negative numbers. So I was not told the salary of the position after requesting it. That's only a few people, but it's negative. As an NPS, they're going out of their way on average to convince others not to apply to that job.
Mhm.
And that goes back to that 99%, that of
Yeah.
99% out of 100. It may only be a few people,
Yeah,
but
the
there's
NPS
a
score-
lot of a few people, right?
Yeah, the NPS score is not something worth conversation right now, but it's
For anybody
the
out there, by the
higher it
way,
is,
just-
the better.
Yeah.
And for somebody to get, for us, anyone to get a score of 62 is extraordinary. That means people not being hired are going out of their way in a positive way.
Yep.
We did think, is there a difference between men and women and how they responded to that? We basically found the differences were not necessarily significant at all. But what it raises for me is that most companies have moved automatically, and probably without a lot of thinking, from asking about salary to asking about expectations. And that's not a big difference. That's just a workaround for compliance sake. That's not going to get you much more. And so the data is now showing it's not giving you much more.
Right.
If you really want to distinguish yourself, you should be an employer who's fully transparent, who steps up and says, here's the value we place on this job. Here's what 80% of the people who come into this job tend to get, and those that get a little bit more, a little bit less, probably on the basis of these things. Is
Right.
that going to be an issue for you? And that would be the kinds of companies that are building the kind of practices that are going to drive the future of candidate experience forward. And now we've got data that kind of supports that kind of thinking.
Yep.
And that excites the hell out of me.
Exactly.
So one of the areas, and let me go back to if I can find it here. So one of the areas that I spend a lot of time on, and again, you do a tremendous amount of work from the after someone applies, and you Kevin, you and I talked about this last year on the podcast. Is where I spend a lot of time is on that pre-hire.
Right.
People are researching it. Can they even find where your job listing and your career site? They heard you're hiring, but they can't figure out how to apply.
Sure.
And I spend a lot of time on the application. So part of it is that's one of the lowest scores it's 47 is on the NPS. I mean, the perception of the application process is pretty low, and then it's even lower for the candidates.
And these, by the way, Ira, these are the candidates who, in the end, did figure out how to apply.
Right.
Right.
So
absolutely.
What we failed to do, and because I think we need to admit the boundary for us is that almost all of our data is coming from candidates who eventually did in fact apply.
Right.
So they're the ones who are telling you, this is not so good.
That's right.
Imagine what the folks we don't even touch would say. These are the ones who disappeared after researching because it was such a pain in the neck that they decided not to apply. They abandoned the process in front.
Well, thanks for queuing me up, because out of that, the fact is that we're talking about 99% of the people who aren't hired who did apply. Is prior to that, there's actually could be as high as another 90% of the people who tried to apply but
Right.
didn't because they couldn't find out how to apply. The job listing is horrible. They have to register to even apply. I just found the company the other day is actually you had to register to see the job listings. I mean,
Right.
it was about how do we capture their name
Wow.
because we want to be able to contact them. I mean, there's so much friction, so many hurdles, and working with clients again, mostly small and medium-sized businesses, because we do track the number of applications that are started versus finished.
Sure.
And there's a healthcare organization that I've been working with for the last 3 years. When they started, they had this horrible long application. I mean, it was a made for your own. It was many pages. And I said, we got to cut that down. So they agreed and they cut it down, but there was still about 100 fields. And I said, I'll go with this but I'm going to show you what your stats are. And within the first month that they were there, 92% of the people who started their application didn't finish it.
Yeah.
And so I said,
the stats can be that high. Oh yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I've got the numbers. And so what we did was we said, listen, there's a two-stage application, sort of using the chatbot model of let's ask the 5 most critical questions. You know,
Yeah.
you're over 18 years old, you have reliable transportation, you're licensed in the state of California, whatever it may be, 4 or 5 questions. If they answer no to any of those questions, you can't do it. Well, a lot of companies don't even know what the requirement is. Well, if they have 2 years of experience and a degree, or so it's like, listen, you have to figure out what qualifies somebody. But they right now have about an 87% completion rate, and that's not the goal. But is that if you're not getting people to apply, that's a problem.
Right.
That are coming to your site. So it always comes down to, is it a marketing issue? Well, we need to have more sponsored ads. We need to buy another ATS. We need to have bigger print. Maybe we should use print. But a lot of companies don't even know that, hey, your marketing campaign is really effective. But
I mean,
just turn them away. I mean, how many roadblocks can you throw up there?
2 things, and I'd like Kevin to respond to something, because there's actually a thread going on in his group today on an aspect of this. But so there's 2 things I would comment. It would be fair to say that we would also love to hear that some of those candidates that don't apply because the research they were able to do was so good and so helpful that it helped them better understand that this is not the right job for them. So we would love for that to measure that as growing up, so that we don't have people wasting their time applying for something they really shouldn't be applying for if they could make better decisions themselves. So that's one thing. Second is this thread that's been going on for the last couple of days among many of the winners, in which was sparked by a question about timing and number of questions that would impact application. And my comment was that there are several studies that show that if you have an application that's 15 minutes or more, and especially if you haven't set expectations around that, you have an abandonment rate that grows at an exponential rate. But in addition to that, because more and more people are doing the research and doing work using smartphones, if you have not built a quality mobile approach that allows for people to apply within a couple minutes, which obviously means thinking along the lines that you were talking about, Ira, then you are missing the possibility of where you should be going in this whole process over time. And one of, Kevin, if you'd mentioned, one of the responses was someone who basically said he was getting 86% conversion rates by reducing his application to about 3 minutes.
Yeah. So we've heard this trend now for a few years, especially with a lot of Candy participants, even when we're doing workshops, even companies that we don't currently work with in any capacity. I see more hands go up now that they've reduced the time, what I call to get in the front door, right? They've taken away some of those hoops. They collapsed the time, and we know since 2016 at least that in our data, for the number of candidates who say in North America that it's taking 15 minutes or less has increased by about over 70%. since 2016. So that trend does continue. Now, there's different things, as we all know. Every organization's a little bit different, and there's different, getting people in the door is one thing, and then they have tests and assessments and filters and gathering more information later on, potentially. That's all part of the process. But that front end, literally, of collapsing it is definitely something that we're going to see continue. And there's that expectation of the candidates as buyers of buyers of the job, of the interest in the employer brand and wanting to work at the organization. We want that experience now. It's not just the younger generations that are driving it. We all want a more streamlined, consistent, easy experience, and we want to be engaged throughout that also. And even post application, even if you're telling me buy afterwards, if it's clear, concise, and definitive, all right, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, there's still this mindset out there, and again, I hear it. I don't hear it so much in larger organizations, but again, the smaller businesses. Well, my boss or the owner of the company, if somebody's not willing to take a half hour to complete the application, we don't want them. And my response is, "How's that working out for you?" In the world, and the fact that, and this just came from Pew, 92% of everyone up from 49 years and younger of working adults, 92% have a mobile phone. 96% of everybody under 30, and for many people, the only access they have to the internet, they're not going to the library to sit down at a desktop and apply. The only access they have is through a mobile phone or a tablet.
Their phone.
That's it. And beyond that, and again, one of the things I talk about also is and some of it's just basic digital marketing 101. It has nothing to do with HR, recruitment, or anything. Is that Google now ranks your mobile website higher than your desktop website. So if you don't have a mobile friendly, responsive website, and you say, "Oh, it doesn't matter, that's not who," you're dinged in the rankings.
Yeah.
And overall, so what you're doing on your career sites also affects what's happening overall. So a lot of things. One other thing here, just with the application, and Gerry, you brought this up earlier, and then we kind of segue into the salary on perception. You and I were talking before we got on about pre-employment testing and how basically we're using the same process, same questionnaire. We digitized it, we put it on. Everything's automated, but nothing's changed. Okay, that's a whole other story. I even had, and again, even though that's my business, is pre-employment testing. 3 years ago in my book, when I published it, I actually wrote a chapter about how that's got to be, that process is as obsolete. But when we look at the application was designed in 1950.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that people, and we're talking
maybe
about
even before,
right? But it was after the war when people would knock on their door and say, "Hey, you pull off the paper, hey, fill out our application," and that was it. So I'm sure it goes back for centuries, but the process that we know today is name, address, city, state, your principal's name from high school, all that stuff. We talk a lot about another bias, is diversity and inclusion. And the first thing, though, that we ask isn't, are you qualified for the job? Do you have a license? Do you have a degree? Are you available? Mm-hmm. Are you willing to relocate? Are you over 18 years old? I mean, the stuff that would knock somebody out. What we ask is first name and last name, which immediately biases the hiring process, and that may not impact. It would be interesting to know if we added that question. If you added that question, would that change the perception of the candidate experience? Just like asking salary expectation. The fact is that someone had to reveal their ethnicity, their gender, their race, first thing before an application started. How does that impact that experience or that perception of that?
Clearly, there are a whole bunch of companies who agree with that issue,
right,
and go to some interesting lengths to be able to block that out,
to mask it, right?
So let me look at it a couple different ways. One, I believe that especially among larger companies that have recruiters doing this, there needs to be the kind of training on the part of the recruiters so that the recruiters are aware of can overcome and work with issues around unconscious bias, not just for themselves, but because if you're going to do the blocking should be done when you provide data to the hiring manager as to whether you go forward. And so the recruiters really are not the ones where the information should be restricted, in my opinion. I think it's defensible if you train and hold them accountable. Smaller companies, a different set of issues, so I won't address that. But the fact of the matter is we don't have to ask ourselves whether there's an unconscious bias around it. There is an unconscious bias. Just ask anyone who comes from a country like India, the name much even more than in the United States, where we have such a diversity of names, etc. Anyway, but in India, the name is tied to your caste, and the implications of that are extraordinarily strong. And if you look culturally around the world, that is really very, very true in a variety of different places. And I can't think of too many countries where your name is not a significant indicator of who you are in terms of class, in terms of a variety of different things. And so becoming aware of that in the United States we're probably the last to figure this out.
Right. Yeah. And with that, I mean, and part of my suggestion to people is not that it's not that you should have an application that doesn't request their name, but right. We're still going back to what we were talking about even with the testing. What we did was we took the old paper test, the old paper application, which started out first name, last name, address, city, state, which also includes some bias because basically where someone lives may indicate whether their bias, may introduce some bias. Is why don't we flip the application upside down? We end in most cases with the education.
So Ira,
employment. So go ahead.
So Ira, let me just push back a little bit. It's not the application; it's what we do with the application.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so I think there is an important need in an application, whether you put it first or last, to get the name and contact information of the individual. However, and perhaps a couple other things. However, I think it should immediately be converted to a profile that you could support sharing with someone who is now deciding, or group that's deciding on whether we go forward, that is focused on the job availability, job readiness, job fit, if you will, of that individual. Mm-hmm. And then if we're transparent and telling people, here's the information I need from you in order to go forward. And by the way, here's an example of what it would look like when somebody gives us this stuff. We convert it to look like this so we can put your best foot forward in considering you as to whether or not we would interview you, screen you, or etc. That's what I would love to see.
There's a wrinkle to that too, where there are, I think, still too many employers that are also then asking for that same information that we're just talking about over and over again in different capacities.
Yep.
Even with the level of technology and systems that we have today in recruiting, and talk about deteriorating a candidate experience very quickly during the application process, which can be, not very exciting in the first place when you're asking for that repetitive information. And, sometimes there's a lot of that is, those are things that can be easily cleaned up too. Everything that we're talking about right now, everything the kinds of information, what you're doing with that information, these are things that can be, I think, remedied in short order within.
Who's going to remedy is Google. Google right now. Right now, if you go to a where you're going to buy a product,
yeah.
You basically, there's several different approaches, but you basically have one click and it fills up the entire thing.
Right.
And why wouldn't the same exist for every single application?
Sure, agreed. So why aren't we doing that now, huh?
Because
Everybody needs to come to my SHRM talk. Everybody needs to come to SHRM Talent Talk. My SHRM Talent Talk is how to make your recruitment process Google friendly.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
That's the talk. Hey, we're almost. We actually said we try to keep this like 30 to 45 minutes, but we were on a roll. So I want to be sensitive to everybody's time and everything. So I really appreciate you guys. I know both of you have some. You both got some websites. Let me see if I can display this. Kevin, the 2019 report is up there.
The 2020 Candy Benchmark program is now open. So
and it's free, by the way. That report's free.
Yeah,
absolutely
download it. There's, even if you just do the executive summary,
the related briefs, past reports, everything's all free on our site. All the resources that we've made, and the 2020 Candy Benchmark program is now open as well for companies.
And tomorrow is, isn't it Candidate Experience 2020?
Candy Experience Day 2020. So for those that want to share, we're looking for your best positive tips, experiences as it relates to recruiting and candidate experience to share across all the social medias, the Twitters, the LinkedIn, the Facebook, as well as Instagram, etc. And throughout the day, we've got webinars tomorrow, Twitter chat. So yes, it'll be a fun social media day.
Super. And everybody needs to take a break at 1 p.m. for Geek Skeezers and Googlization.
There you go.
Show.
Right.
Yeah. We've got Charlene Lee. We're talking about the disruption mindset.
Oh, nice.
Cool. We're going to talk about basically that's what we're talking about is how do we transform the whole process.
Sure.
And Gerry, you got Career Crossroads.
Yep.
Up here.
And that's our current website address too, is cxr.works.
Yep. Yeah, we have that up to date. And on there is there's an article on the gender equality, which I'm sure has a lot of interest for people, but also the salary discussion.
Is buried in that article too.
And then one more related thing to that, since we're plugging different things too, on February 20th, it's also listed on our site now. Gerry and Shannon, who also works for Gerry at Career Crossroads, they're going to talk about some of that, right, at our virtual conference. Yeah,
I want to dig a little bit deeper into gender equality and the impact that it has from a not only just a candidate point of view, but from an employee point of view as well. Right. It affects candidate and employee experience in a big way, and there are some things that I think are missing in terms of how we're looking at it.
Correct.
Well, I thank both of you guys. Great day, great conversation. If there's anything else I can, help you guys with, other than promoting both of all the work you're doing great work, and I'm constantly devouring it, and I appreciate that. It helps me make my life because I get to talk about, rely on the findings that you have and help people improve it. I think just from one thing here, let me, I don't know, got too many slides going here. If you want to participate or get advanced notices or get the replays on these, join Googlization Nation. You can go up to googlizationnation.com, just take your name and email. That's the newsletter version. Yesterday we had Jean Meister. We were talking about the employee experience and the survey that was there.
Cool.
Today we're talking about this. Tomorrow we got Charlene Lee on disruption mindset. Last week we had Enrique Rubio from Hacking HR. So a lot of good material. It's free. So
right.
Go up and get it.
And everything's archived there, right?
Everything is it's archived one place or another. We're building the archive.
Okay. Got it.
So absolutely. But thank you guys very, very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Bye, Ra.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Work.